For those of you that are familiar with my show, you'll know we often discuss the rise of gender ideology and the erasure of biological sex. While awareness in New Zealand may have lagged behind other countries, many Kiwis now recognise over the past decade the idea that gender is self-declared and disconnected from biology has influenced schools, healthcare, sport, governments, public debate. But there's now growing pushback from those who have long been speaking out. My first guest this morning is one of them. Helen Joyce, director of Sex Matters, which is a UK-based women's rights organisation. She's an acclaimed author, journalist, and campaigner known for her work on sex, gender and public policy. She is in the country at the moment for a series of talks hosted by the Women's Rights Party for the first leg of it, and then the Free Speech Union will host her for the second leg. And we are very lucky to have her here this morning. Helen, good morning to you.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
No, look, I'm so appreciative being early in the morning, and I know you've got a plane to catch. Can you, Helen, just for our listeners, give us a bit of a background on what has brought you to where you are now? I mean, I know it could be quite long, it will be, but just kind of in a nutshell.
Sure. So I was a journalist at The Economist from 2005, and in 2017 I was asked to write an article about this strange new phenomenon of children saying that they were trans. And that's what woke me up to it. I hadn't actually noticed myself. I hadn't seen anything about it. And I quickly realised that if you say that men can identify as women and that makes them women, then you can't have anything that's just for women. Like, just a logical thing to say. Men can come into women's spaces, they can compete in women's sports, you get men in women's prisons, you get men in women's rape crisis centres, and also you can't just focus on women when you need to for things like public policy or medicine. So I quickly realised this is a huge infringement on women's rights, and also a big problem for children. You can't keep children safe unless you're clear about what sex everybody is. It's essential for safeguarding. And it's also a very bad idea to lie to children, and instead schools were lying to children and telling them they can be whichever sex they like. They should look inside themselves and see what they feel like. So I became so concerned about this, I wrote a book, Trans When Ideology Meets Reality, which came out in 2021. And then I actually left The Economist in 2022 and joined Sex Matters, as you say, which is now a charity. And I campaign with that, and I also continue to write and travel and speak freelance.
Well done, Helen. See, you got that in like under 2 minutes. Amazing. Well done. It might be, I know that there's probably many aspects to this as well, but what has been behind the rise of gender ideology in your eyes?
It's such a big question, but I'd point out a few specifics. I mean, one of them is social media, because social media allows ideas to spread without them being mediated by any authorities. And in particular, it allows children to talk directly to each other in places where adults don't even see. So the idea that you were meant to choose your own gender was a huge thing on Tumblr, sort of 2013 to 2018 or so. And grown-ups didn't even know until their children said to them suddenly, you know, you thought you had a daughter, but actually you have a son. And then the other thing I'd pick out, if I had to pick out two things, is the various big human rights organizations, you know, in America and the ACLU and GLAAD, in the UK it's Stonewall, I'm not sure what your equivalents are here. When they won gay marriage, they lost the thing that they used to fundraise, and they lost their main cause. So they were looking for a new cause rather than just close up. It's a sort of phenomenon that people call St. George needs a new dragon to fight. So they all retooled for the next big marquee cause, which they decided was going to be the right to declare your sex to be whatever you wanted it to be. It's a bizarre cause, but anyway, that's what they did.
Look, it's been a couple of years for me, Helen, to have my eyes opened to this. And I came from another company that was and is completely, in the pink parade, or in the we call it the tick, you know, and I wonder why so many companies and governments have been absolutely captured by this global movement, whereas you would think, these are intelligent people running these companies or individuals, Do you see it as a contagion?
I think that what it is that people fall for this arc of progress narrative. You know, there was first we got women to vote, and black liberation, gay marriage, and that this is just the next liberatory thing, and they don't look too closely at it because it sounds liberatory if you say it quick. We get to define ourselves, and you forget that actually that has impacts on other people that are anything but liberatory. And then also there's kind of right-sidism in politics. Like if your side are for something, then you think that must be part of the things that you're for. I must say it took me a year to notice too, really. I kept thinking I'm missing something. It seems so obviously dumb and so obviously dangerous for such large groups, but people that I otherwise respected seemed to think it was extremely important. So I kept checking, like, what am I missing? What am I missing? And then I became really sure I wasn't missing anything, that they were missing something. But most people don't have time to do that. They're just getting on with their jobs. They're running their companies. You know, anyone in politics has a million things they're thinking about. And then the last thing I'd say is that if you go against this, you get such horrific attacks that people who say just one thing, like somebody who just says, like, gosh, I'm a bit worried about the fact that there are rapists in women's jails, or it seems a bit unfair that men are allowed to compete, biological men are allowed to compete in women's sports. They get like just dumped on from on high, and then lots of them just never speak again.
And I think that's a real key to it, Helen, because briefly in my situation, I said on a previous show, only women can have babies. Controversial, Helen, out there, wild. I know.
I mean, literally no man has ever had a baby.
Yeah, and I said you've got to have ovaries and a uterus, and and I was dragged through hell and back by my company, and ostracised and isolated and made to, sneak through the back door to my job. It was a phenomenal situation that, you understand. And I think when I said, why do people seem to accept this, or they're blindly going down the path going, oh, but it's all right. They haven't had some part of society turn on them.
I think they see what happened to you, and they don't want to. They don't want to have some part of society turn on them. And also, a lot of people would think you must have done something awful.
Yeah.
To be treated like that,
Yes. I know.
No smoke without fire, they'll say.
That crazy thing. And as I delved deeper, I mean, I was, stories have come out that I talk about on my show. I don't know if you've heard of LAVA, which is Lesbian Action for Visibility Aotearoa. You must be aware then they've taking legal action at the moment against Wellington, the Wellington Pride Festival, after they were refused access to hold a stall at a Pride gala. The beginning of the LGBT word soup, lesbians, but you've said too that lesbians come under a lot of pressure from these groups.
That's right, because if a man can identify as a woman, then a heterosexual man can be a lesbian. I mean, this is ridiculous, but that's the conclusion you draw if men can be women. And then real lesbians, women who are solely attracted to other women, obviously don't think that heterosexual men are suitable sexual partners for them. If they say so, they're being exclusionary because they're saying that trans women are not women. Now, trans women are not women, that's correct. But, in the LGBTQIA++ movement, it's the main article of faith is that trans women, which means men who identify as women, are women. So they have to be kicked out. If you believe in this new ideology, you've got to remove everybody who still remembers that biological sex is real and bases their categories on that, because those people, you have to paint them as bigots. So that's why they weren't allowed to march, because they were take part in this Pride event, because they recognise that men are men, not women, and that heterosexual men are not lesbians.
In the UK, there was big news in the UK with the Supreme Court ruling that under the Equality Act, sex means biological sex, male or female, not self-declared gender. Are you seeing any real change on the ground, or is it too early? Government departments, NGOs, are companies starting to adjust their policies, Helen? I mean,
starting. I mean, it's extraordinary because that judgment was 6 months ago, and the moment that the Supreme Court makes a ruling, the law not just is what they say, it always was. So when they said in April this year that the protected characteristic of sex in the Equality Act means biological sex, not self-identified sex, or your paperwork, which you are able to change in the UK, from that point on, it became unlawful to run single-sex services or anything like that, except on the basis of sex. But lots of companies were saying, use whichever toilet you feel most comfortable in, pronouns and email signatures and so on. And I think they were paralysed because they had spent 10 years being told by lobby groups that this was the progressive thing to do.
Yes.
And also, ranting to their own staff about how important all of this was and, disciplining people who disagreed with it and so on. So they couldn't do the handbrake turn that was necessary to rip up their policies. So loads of places still have policies that are unlawful, and we at Sex Matters are starting to take legal action. It's ridiculous to take legal action to enforce a Supreme Court judgment. But that is what we're having to do to sort of provide the necessary ballast to anyone who has to go back to their company and say, we got this wrong. Do you know what?
Yeah.
That's the main thing. People don't want to say, we got it wrong.
Yeah. Helen, you're right. And here we are facing our own issues, of course. The New Zealand Law Commission is recommending that gender identity and intersex traits be added as protected grounds under the Human Rights Act.